was like, what are you doing up 9? I'm just scamming. Responding to support tickets on Into.
Someone trying to order Windows through our support.
What happened there? We're recording, so just a quick note on what the hell we're doing. We had this brilliant idea that we think we're saying so many brilliant things that why don't we start recording it? And yeah, so here we are, just recording one of our typical weekly rants.
It's an organized mud fight. Or fist fight, maybe.
Basically, yeah. And so apparently Benedetto got 4 hours of sleep and Melde somewhat similar. So it's going to be great, right? Just running on coffee.
Yeah. So bring a topic, Henrik. I guess you're bringing the topic, and then...
Yeah. I mean, we're not prepared at all, but but there's been a bunch of talk this week about submeters. So we have So I think we've had some rants on the internal chat, and why not elaborate a little bit on that?
I've had rants at customers, prospects that have invested millions of Danish kroner, so 100,000 euros, on installing submeters at least. So I feel like some of my rants have been pushed to them as well, whereas you have been more internal.
Yep. Well, why don't we start there, Melle? What are you hearing and what are you saying?
Yeah, so I think it's just a topic, at least from my perspective, that keeps coming up. An example of this is that we have 35 Danish municipalities as customers now out of 98. And every single time we get a new customer, a key topic is, what about submeters? Hey, I need a submeter on my water usage, there's a hot water usage in the building, right? That is a part of the district heating system. And we're like, no, you don't. Because if you take the outside temperature and normalize your consumption with that, then you will actually get a really good understanding of when you're using heating to heat the rooms and when you're using heating to something else, which can really only be water. And this is just one of those things that just keeps coming up. And every time I explain it, people are very skeptical, and it's like they're going through some kind of process. And then at some point, they're like, at least sometimes, they're like, holy fuck, I don't need submeters. But having now managed this process for 5 years with so many different clients, I'm just wondering, how can we have this discussion once and for all?
Yeah, and I mean, guess heating is just one, and on electricity, you typically find
cooling
thousands of submeters, and you get the feeling that you're more drowning in data than you're actually getting something out of it, right?
Oh man, that's another. I think this topic is just rants all over.
Yeah, so I was thinking we might, just to be a little fair as well, try to see if we can think about places where it could actually make sense. So I know, Benedetto, you've thought a little bit about how we can see it from the other side as well. Maybe we should make sure that we get that in.
Yeah, still manning. I love it. Let's go. I mean, I think if we think about these certifications like ISO 50001 and similars, they mandate you to install submetering because
no, they don't.
They mandate you to estimate what the individual subcomponents of your building will be consuming. And I guess until now, there was no really a very good way to do that using main meter data, both because there was no granularity in the main meter data and because there was no smart AI and algorithms that were intelligent enough to extract that information. Mm-hmm. And so this has been probably mainly related to larger facilities larger facilities or complex ones. So I think the first place is to actually implement ISO 50000, where probably not the type of buildings that we look at in Endo, which are fairly similar and large portfolios of things that are operating in a predictable way.
Sorry, also just that's only one, right? I think a lot of the traditional standards that they have to comply with, or that they voluntarily choose to comply with, like GRESP, for example, is really focused on submeters as a necessary component in measuring things, right? So it can come from the compliance angle there.
Right. Like, because I think that up until a few years ago, it was not really contemplated as an option, right? To just use main meter data, because it was seen as, first of all, you didn't have smart meters, and it was not easy to access even the smart meter data. And then you had no way of actually extracting insights from it.
So a few notes here. So I actually disagree with this. Because you were able to do ISO 50001 certified energy management before you even had access to smart meters, whether it was main utility meters or submeters. And the standard doesn't really say that you need an energy management system either. It just says that you have to be able to measure and collect your consumption data. But nothing in terms of granularity. What it does define is this concept of a SEU. And SEU is really defined as a large consumption unit, or a consumption unit that has a large potential to where you can potentially decrease your consumption. And I think that's actually the really interesting part of this, is because, before I go on full rant, I just wanted to make that note on part of the ISO certification process, which I fully think that you don't need submeters for a lot of applications. At least everything non-industrial, without submeters, you should be fine, in my opinion.
Yeah, and also, like, this is one of the projects we're working on with Jakob and for BC, and the UDP project is on actually seeing how far we can go on main meter data within the constraints of something like the ISO 50001 requirements, right?
Yeah, but think about it this way. There's this Plan, Do, Check, Act framework, right? And a part of the planning framework, you are planning on where to collect the data. And if there is a meaningful place, say that 50% of your total consumption comes from this one building, then you might need to break that down in further subcomponents than does the main meter data. Now the question becomes, how can I then do that? And that is, of course, typically done through submeters, but it can also be done mathematically, because you can see, this particular building is using, so if it was 50% of the portfolio's consumption, then 50% again of that consumption is driven only by the heating consumption. Okay, well, a machine learning model can pick that up and then make a heat profile and everything you'd actually get anyway from the submeter. So yes, in that regard, the ML can act as a submeter. You can make a virtual meter by doing that. But the more interesting aspect for me, at least, is actually that if you have a more traditional building portfolio, say that you're a pension fund with 80 buildings and you want to do ISO 50001, then your buildings can pose a risk on, for instance, a water leak. And then the question becomes, if I have the main utility water meters, do I then need submeters? And I would actually argue that no, you don't, because if you get the main meters, you will be notified when a risk is occurring, when you have a leak, and then it becomes more about the process afterwards. Okay, so how do I handle the process? Now I know that I have a leak in one of my 80 buildings. I need to find out where it is and what to do about it.
But that requires as well that your water utility actually can collect and send that data on an hourly level, maybe, in order to detect things at the right time.
Of course, which many do. Yeah.
And most others to do, right? I think it's mandatory at some point.
Yeah, but also like having an analysis that is intelligent enough to not just notify you whenever there is a spike for whatever reason, because everyone wants to take a shower at the same time, but be able to process that signal and transform it into the correct insight, because otherwise we just end up in the alert overload that we see so much within these organizations.
But that's
yeah.
That's actually exactly one of my points. In like at least 3 cases now, Enso has been replacing a legacy energy management system where there has been a lot of submeters, and in one of them there was like 5,000 meters submeters, and now they have main meters, and they have less than 1,000 main meters, and it's really difficult for them to grasp that you can get more relevant information out of 1,000 meters with some intelligence than you can with 5,000 meters without intelligence. And that is really, to me, that is the core of the problem, is that you have all of these meters, so you're assuming that you're getting the value out of them. But the problem with 5,000 meters is that there is 5,000 meters. In one of these cases, for instance, they found a water leak that had been going on for a year and a half, because who has the capacity to analyze them manually? And of course, no one, right? In a spreadsheet or wherever that should be happening, and it just didn't. So I think for me, that's the flipping point, when they actually see that they can get more insights out of less data, which is really fun coming from a data company, right?
Yeah. I was working on this headline, which is really, can we actually say with confidence that basically more data from submeters and sensors and everything typically will lead to less savings? It's basically just flipping everything on its head. All right, but surely there must be some cases where it does make sense, right? So I know we have a very large facility,
Yeah,
and there's thousands of submeters. What are we doing?
but this is the most fun story, right? Because we have a large facility with thousands of submeters as well, and where I would say, okay, here it makes sense to have submeters to be able to identify the problems. And this is actually one of the cases where we found a water leak. But the ironic thing is that we found the water leak on the main meter. Let that sink in for a second. We found the water leak on the main meter despite having thousands of submeters. Maybe not thousands of submeters on that particular facility, but at least a part of that big organization. So hundreds of submeters in that particular site. But then the submeters was then used to afterwards go out and find, okay, where is the leak actually happening?
Right, so that's where it can make sense. And I guess also on something like electricity, right? Here, the main meter will cover way too much, maybe square meters of the building. But then you're basically using submeters as main meters for a particular part of the buildings, right?
Yeah. But that's kind of the opposite of the ISO 50001, where you're doing it on the energy heavy consumers, like you would put it on the cooling or put it on the heating system or a processing unit, or like something that's very energy intensive, right? Yeah.
I'm developing this theory right now. Let's see if we can make it work. That the amount to which it makes sense to have submeters is the inverse of the size of your portfolio. So larger portfolios, it makes less sense, and smaller portfolios, it can make more sense. So if you have like hundreds of buildings, it's probably very likely that you are a couple of energy managers for hundreds of buildings. And then you just need a way to understanding which building you have the problem. And that is enough if you have analysis on main meter data. I have 500 buildings, 10 of them, something is working during the night, they have a water leak or it's not performing correctly. I need to know which one. Once I know, I go there, I have a technical team, we identify the problem. While if you have like 2 energy managers for 10 hospitals, then it becomes a little less important to understand which hospital has the problem, but then more and more important that within that building, you can identify, like if it's thousands of square meters, of hospital, it can, like, even if you know from the main meter that there's a water leak, it can take a month or two to understand in which section of the hospital, and then it can make more sense to have the submeter.
But Benedetto, I think you want to link this thought that you've had that actually makes a lot of sense to the ISO 50001 standard again, because if you have a rule of thumb, which is not in the standard, but I think makes a lot of sense, and is something that I've discussed on the many talks around implementing ISO in large organizations, the rule of thumb that if you have one of your units representing certain percentage of your total consumption, then you need to break it down. So say that you have your large portfolio, and then one of the units, one of the SEUs is 40% of your total consumption. You might want to break that down into subunits so that you have a rule of thumb could be that nothing should be consuming more than 10% of my total consumption. Again, it really depends also on what the total consumption is, because if the consumption is large enough, there can be economic incentives to break it even further down. But this rule of thumb that you shouldn't have any SEUs standalone, use more than maybe 10% or 20%, whatever the rule of thumb is for this organization, I think is really good and makes sense. And it's a less mathematical way of saying this with how you introduced it with the
I'm not sure the inverse relationship holds, right? Because you wouldn't, if you had 5 small buildings, you didn't necessarily need a lot of submeters on them either, right? So it's not just the size of the portfolio, but it's really the size of the building compared to the coverage of the main meters in some way. So defining that, I know like Jakob often mentions the way he thinks about SEU in terms of single buildings is below 10,000 square meters, right? So it's just some rule of thumb, but it gives some way to think about it.
Yeah, but I think
Yeah, I guess.
Sorry, Benedetto, the breakup of the very large can apply to anyone, right? Because what you have is, if you have a portfolio and you're looking at your total consumption being 100 gigawatt hours per year, and if you have one of your buildings out of this 100 buildings, just to keep it very simple, consuming 20 of those gigawatt hours, you want to break it down further because your relative focus should be very much on that 20%, right? And even if it was larger, you definitely wanted to break it down so that you're really understanding, okay, are there any things here that I can optimize?
But I would even challenge the SEU concept in this area, right? Because you might not even want to add submeters, even if the system is large, if you can estimate it very precisely. And we have all the data and everything around it to potentially do that. So we can see a very sharp heating profile, cooling profile. We can see where the set point is for process cooling, for comfort cooling, and everything just from the main meter data and some clever analysis with weather data. And so in that case, you don't even need it for the largest buildings, right? And we've seen that in many cases with some of the largest buildings of hypermarkets and so on, right? That are saving millions of euros in just by analyzing the main meter, because it's not about the complex. And of course it can help maybe in finding the problem in the end and so on. But if you can see that there's hundreds of thousands of savings here, then you'll be incentivized to find the problem. That's not going to be the big issue.
Yeah.
So even in those cases, it's not really needed, but yeah.
I feel like I was interrupting you before, Benedetto. Sorry about that.
I was trying to defend my inverse theory, my beloved inverse theory that I just came.
I think you might want to, I think you're in love with that, and then maybe just leave it. Kill your darlings.
Yeah. But
Okay.
I want to ask Benedetto, did you get, you kind of got the role here of having to steel man? Did you get through the arguments? Are there more things that where you can kind of say, for these reasons, it does make sense? And then I think, yes, let's try to see if there's others.
I mean, I think that like the two main areas where I see this make sense is one, very large buildings. We already said that, because even though I can recognize something, well, first of all, it cannot be easy to recognize something on main meter data. If I have thousands of cubic meters consumption, then like a leak which can still be relevant on one of the meters, I cannot see it on the main meter unless it's like huge, right? So that could make some sense. And the other is probably just industrial applications. So places where you actually need to know what is consuming, because you need to take some decisions based on that. You need to take some decisions based on how many units are being produced. You need to take some decisions because you need to keep the temperature of a certain process to a certain level. And then like it also ties into the fact like, why is Enton not working that much in the industrial sector? Because these are really hard to predict just using standard features like we do for buildings that are more predictable, like supermarket, like offices, like schools, etc. Because it's very custom processes where if you don't have a meter, it's really hard to come up with a proxy that can predict that. I think
The way that I typically describe it is that in a manufacturing setting, your consumption will not be affected by the variables that we include, but it will be affected by the consumption or the production, right? So I actually think that we have some manufacturing on the platform, and one of them is producing furniture. And I expected that we weren't able to give them any recommendations out of the main meter data, but it turns out that they're operating 5 days a week, right? So their consumption profile, even though it's driven by manufacturing chairs and tables and whatnot, and that is driving the energy consumption, the way that they do it is very schematic. And because we're integrating the weekday and the hour of the day, we actually get a very good understanding of that consumption. And then later on, they actually had a problem with, I believe it was a ventilation system that started working at night 24/7. And we detected that with the main meter data, although the relative consumption change wasn't great, it was still like they could save, it was based in Denmark, so like 200,000 Danish, 30,000 euros a year. And they went out and did that. So, and so it's really not to try and just kill your argument every single time. But this was a case where we were still able to define problems based on the mains, and there could of course be problems driven by the manufacturing of these chairs. There could be processes they could optimize. They could better understand if they had a better energy audit as you do in the start of the ISO process, but you are still able to find the issues, or when issues do occur, you can still identify them out of the mains because you still have a good understanding of the other, at least in this application. If it was a manufacturing plant that had a very varying consumption because their processes were changing all the time and so forth, we probably couldn't have done this in any meaningful way. We would have had way too many kind of false positives. But because this had been operating in a certain way for so long, and it all of a sudden spiked, and I forwarded this alert, they were actually able to identify the root cause of it and to be the ventilation system, which is kind of fun because it's always ventilation systems, right? The HVAC is always the problem, or very often.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I feel like at least what we can conclude, and what I guess we always try to also advise on, is let's always start with the main meters, like even in an industrial setting, but especially in any other setting. Get the main meters on, we get the overview, you get the perspective, you'll probably be able to find issues. It's very rare that we don't. And from there, of course, you can discuss good reasons for digging deeper, but I think we can agree on that, right?
Yeah. I wonder if people could also think about this trade-off of having them. So one thing is that you need to buy them, but another thing is that you still need to maintain the data streams. And if it's not utility and billing grade, then it's your problem. It's the user that has to maintain these loggers and meters and whatnot.
Yeah.
And that's also a hassle. But then also the analytics part of it is 5,000 meters better than 1,000. And why should it be that? So I think those are actually the kind of the thoughts that I try and instill in people and make them think about.
Yeah, I think we've already had a few good cases where they were about to install thousands of meters or hundreds for God knows how much money, and then being able to maintain all of those and analyze and whatnot. And then we managed to get the data from the utility on the main meter instead, and they realized they didn't have to. So saved, not just from energy savings, but actually saved quite a lot just on the installation part.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, let's end that here. We wanted to also just see if there's anything else to catch up on or communicate. I think, are we doing anything interesting? Benedetto, you're going to a conference to speak soon in the UK?
Yeah, it's called Verified. It's going to be 5th of November in Birmingham, and it's about M&V. Measurement and verification of energy efficiency savings. I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
That there could be a conference about MMV, right? That there were enough nerds together in a room.
You know
discuss
everything
their
about it,
experience.
but you don't know about the conference. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, we'll be there. We'll try to see what is the role of AI in this measurement and verification world, which until now has been very manual. And believe it or not, most of these MMV plans are actually done using monthly data, a regression of monthly data. And then smart meters come in, AI comes in, and we can do way more accurate analysis of what's going on within these facilities. And I could speak for hours about MMV, but I guess that the main theme is how do we understand what we need to invest on and what doesn't have an impact, because we have limited amount of budgets that we can spend on energy efficiency and on decarbonization. So it's really important to make sure that what we do has an impact. And so I've been asked to run a workshop, a breakout session on how to verify the outputs of AI. So it will be fun. If you're in the UK, you can join us.
Yeah, that's super nice. I feel like we should almost have that as a main topic for another discussion, because there's so many touch points there as well on what people used to do and what we maybe should be doing today.
I think about it this way: by doing M&V, you can see what the return on investment is on your time or your money, right? So if you don't do it, you're acting in blind. And if you do it, you know that whatever you did last week had this impact. So it really leads to two things. It leads to that you will hopefully stop doing the things that leads to no impact, and you will hopefully do more of the things that does lead to a greater impact than you actually thought, which is then also that can then be prioritized.
Now we're starting the next discussion here. I mean, it goes back to the submeters as well. Like, many people think they need submeters to do this.
No.
It stops you, right? And the time you have to spend in Excel and pulling in weather data and normalizing and whatever, right? So all of that is something that, of course, we care a lot about automating as far as possible.
Yeah.
Nice.
I think it's
yeah.
Is that a teaser? So we have to do this.
Yeah.
Let's make a note. Let's make a note for one of the next weeks.
Okay.
Exactly.
Dig deeper.
If whoever listened survived until now, then they know that they can't miss the next episode.
Yeah.
Or your conference in Birmingham.
Yeah. Go in and book the flights.
All right, brains.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
Till the next one.
Yeah. Cheers.